The fluorescent lights of Nashville General Hospital cast their familiar harsh glow across the 7th-floor hallway. As Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan adjusted her worn nursing shoes for what would be one of her last shifts. After 32 years of walking these corridors, her feet knew every crack in the linoleum, every squeaky spot that might wake a sleeping patient. At 64, Maggie's auburn hair had long since turned silver, and the lines around her green eyes told stories of countless nights spent comforting families in their darkest hours. "Morning, Maggie," called Sarah Chen, the young charge nurse who had become like a daughter to her over the past 5 years. "Room 7112 is asking for you specifically." Maggie glanced at her patient assignment sheet, noting the familiar room number. Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old woman recovering from hip surgery, had been under Maggie's care for the past week. The elderly woman reminded Maggie of her own mother, who had passed 15 years ago, fierce, independent, and suspicious of anyone trying to help her. "She probably wants to lecture me about the hospital coffee again," Maggie chuckled, but her smile faded as she noticed the serious expression on Sarah's face. "Actually, there's something else. Dr. Morrison wants to see you in his office after your shift. He said it's about your retirement paperwork." A knot formed in Maggie's stomach. She had submitted her retirement papers 3 weeks ago, planning to finish out the month. With her granddaughter Emma starting her senior year of high school, Maggie had hoped to spend more time helping her prepare for college applications. Money was tight. It had been tight for years. But Emma was brilliant, and Maggie was determined to find a way to make her dreams come true. The morning rounds began with their usual rhythm. Room 708 housed Mr. Peterson, a gruff construction worker who pretended to be annoyed by Maggie's cheerful morning greetings, but always managed to crack a smile. Room 710 contained twin sisters in their 70s who had requested to share a room during their gallbladder surgeries, and who spent most of their time arguing about which one of them was older by 12 minutes. But it was room 7112 that held Maggie's attention. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson sat propped up in bed, her silver hair perfectly styled despite being in the hospital for a week. She had been a high school principal for 40 years and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Margaret," Mrs. Henderson said, as Maggie entered with the morning medications, "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." Maggie paused in her routine, setting the small paper cup of pills on the bedside table. Over the years, she had learned that when patients asked for honesty, they usually already knew the answer to their question. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. What's on your mind?" "That young man who came to visit yesterday, the one with the nervous energy who kept pacing. He asked a lot of questions about you. Said he was doing some kind of research project about exceptional nurses. Do you know him?" Maggie frowned, trying to remember. The day had been particularly busy, with 2 admissions and a patient emergency that had kept her running until well past her shift. She vaguely recalled seeing an unfamiliar man in the hallway, talking quietly with Sarah, but she hadn't paid much attention. "I'm not sure who you mean. Can you describe him?" "Tall, maybe 6 feet, brown hair, wearing a baseball cap and jeans. He had kind eyes, but he seemed, I don't know, nervous? Like he was working up the courage to do something important. He asked the strangest questions. Wanted to know how long you'd worked here, if you remembered specific patients from 20 years ago, things like that." A chill ran down Maggie's spine, though she couldn't say why. In her 3 decades of nursing, she had cared for thousands of patients. Some faces stayed with her forever, burned into her memory by trauma or triumph. Others faded like morning mist. But 20 years ago, that would have been 2003, during some of the most challenging months of her career. "Did he say anything else?" Mrs. Henderson studied her carefully. "He seemed particularly interested in whether you remembered a patient named Brooks. Troil Brooks, I think he said. Does that name mean anything to you? The medication cup slipped from Maggie's fingers, scattering pills across the linoleum floor. She knelt quickly to gather them, her hands trembling slightly as the memories came flooding back. Troil Raymond Brooks Sr. She would never forget that name, or the man who carried it. It had been December 2003, just 2 weeks before Christmas. Maggie had been going through her own personal hell at the time. Her daughter Jessica had recently been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and the medical bills were mounting faster than Maggie could pay them, even with her hospital insurance. Jessica's husband had left 6 months earlier, unable to cope with the diagnosis, leaving Jessica to raise 5-year-old Emma alone while fighting for her life. Troil Brooks had been admitted to the oncology unit, referred from his small-town doctor in Oklahoma for treatment of advanced lung cancer. He was a quiet man in his 70s, with weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and eyes that held both sadness and strength. What struck Maggie immediately was how alone he seemed. He had a son, he mentioned, but the son was often traveling for work and couldn't be there as much as either of them would have liked. Mr. Brooks was a special patient, Maggie said softly, standing up with the scattered pills. I remember him very well. He was a gentleman, polite, never complained, even when the treatments were making him miserable. What she didn't say was how much he had reminded her of her own father, who had died when she was just 25. Troil had the same gentle strength, the same way of making everyone around him feel like they mattered. During his 3-week stay, Maggie had found herself spending extra time in his room, not just because he needed the medical care, but because he seemed to need the human connection. Mrs. Henderson was watching her with sharp eyes. The young man seemed to think you went above and beyond for Mr. Brooks. Said something about you staying late to sit with him during his treatments. Maggie busied herself with replacing the spilled medication, hoping Mrs. Henderson wouldn't notice the tears that were threatening to form. She had stayed late many nights that December, but not just for Troil Brooks. Her own daughter was receiving chemotherapy at the same hospital, often on the same schedule. It had made sense to coordinate her visits, to sit with both her patient and her child during their treatments. But Troil had been alone, and something about his quiet dignity had touched her heart. I just did my job, Maggie said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. What she had done for Troil Brooks had gone beyond professional duty. She had seen herself in his situation, a parent facing the unthinkable, trying to maintain hope while preparing for the worst. She remembered the night before his final surgery, when his condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Troil had been scheduled for an aggressive procedure that offered only a small chance of success, but it was his only option. His son had been stuck in Atlanta due to a snowstorm, unable to get a flight to Nashville. Troil had been trying to be brave, but Maggie could see the fear in his eyes. She had pulled a chair next to his bed and sat with him through the night, holding his hand when the pain got bad, reading to him from a book of Robert Frost poems she had found in the hospital library. They had talked about his son, about his pride in the man his boy had become, about his regrets and his hopes. Troil had shown her a worn photograph of his son performing on stage somewhere, and Maggie had politely admired it, without really understanding its significance. He talked about his son a lot, Maggie said to Mrs. Henderson, her voice distant with memory. He was so proud of him, said he was a musician, that he was successful but still remembered where he came from. Mr. Brooks worried that he hadn't been supportive enough of his son's career in the early days. The surgery had not gone well. Troil had never woken up, passing peacefully 3 days later with his son finally by his side. Maggie remembered the young man, tall, broad-shouldered, with his father's kind eyes but carrying a weight of grief that seemed almost too heavy for one person to bear. He had thanked her repeatedly for taking care of his father, his voice breaking as he spoke about how much it meant to know his dad hadn't been alone. The son came back a few weeks later. Maggie continued, lost in the memory. After the funeral, he wanted to thank the staff again. I was on duty that night, and we talked for a long time about his father. He seemed like a good man, dealing with a lot of pain. I never saw him again after that. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a long moment, studying Maggie's face. Margaret, do you ever watch country music awards shows? The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Maggie looked up in surprise. Not really. I'm more of a classical music person. Why? No particular reason. Just curious. Mrs. Henderson smiled mysteriously. But I think you should be prepared for some visitors today. That young man from yesterday seemed very determined to find you. Before Maggie could ask what she meant, her pager buzzed. Room 715 needed assistance, and the morning was already getting away from her. She made a mental note to ask Sarah about the mysterious visitor later, but as the day progressed, the conversation with Mrs. Henderson faded into the background noise of a typically hectic shift. It wasn't until she was preparing to leave for the day that Sarah approached her again, this time with an expression that was hard to read. Maggie, there's someone here to see you. He's been waiting in the family conference room for about an hour. Says it's about a patient you cared for 20 years ago. The knot in Maggie's stomach tightened. She had been dreading her meeting with Dr. Morrison about her retirement paperwork, worried that there might be some complication with her pension or benefits. The last thing she needed was a visitor dredging up old memories, especially if it was somehow connected to a malpractice issue or patient complaint. Did he say which patient? A Mr. Brooks. Troil Brooks. Maggie's breath caught. After 20 years, what could anyone possibly want to discuss about Troil Brooks? She had provided the best care she could under difficult circumstances. The man had died from his illness, not from any medical error. His son had seemed grateful at the time, not angry or litigious. Is there a lawyer with him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression softened with understanding. No lawyer, just him. Maggie, I don't think this is what you're worried about. He seems, I don't know how to describe it, nervous, but in a good way, like someone who's about to give someone a really meaningful gift. With trembling hands, Maggie removed her stethoscope and placed it in her locker. She had changed into her street clothes, a simple blue cardigan and khaki pants that had seen better days, but were clean and respectable. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a tired woman with worry lines and silver hair, but also someone who had spent her life caring for others. Whatever this was about, she would face it with the same dignity she brought to everything else. The family conference room was at the end of the hall, designed to provide privacy for difficult conversations between medical staff and patient families. As Maggie approached, she could see through the small window in the door that someone was indeed waiting inside, though his back was turned to her. She knocked softly and entered when she heard a muffled, "Come in." The man who turned to face her was not the grieving son she remembered from 20 years ago. This was a man in his early 50s, successful and confident, wearing expensive jeans and a simple button-down shirt. But the eyes, those were the same kind eyes that had looked at her with such gratitude all those years ago. He was taller than she remembered and broader, with the bearing of someone comfortable in the spotlight, though he seemed nervous now. "Mrs. O'Sullivan," he said, standing up quickly. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Garth Brooks, Troil Brooks' son." The room seemed to spin slightly. Garth Brooks. The name hit her like a physical blow, not because she was a fan, She honestly knew very little about country music, but because suddenly pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed began falling into place. Mrs. Henderson's question about award shows, the mysterious visitor asking about exceptional nurses, the photograph Troyle had shown her of his son performing on stage. "Oh my," she said softly, sinking into the nearest chair. You're famous, aren't you?" Garth smiled, and in that smile she could see his father's gentle warmth. "Yes, ma'am, I suppose I am. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because 20 years ago, you were an angel to my family during the worst time of our lives, and I've never forgotten that kindness." Maggie stared at Garth Brooks, trying to reconcile the man before her with her memories of the grieving son from 2 decades ago. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she placed them in her lap, a gesture she had perfected over years of delivering difficult news to families. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea who you were. Your father never. I mean, he mentioned you were a musician, but I didn't understand." Garth pulled his chair closer to hers, his expression gentle. Dad wasn't one to name drop. Even when he was sick and scared, he was proud of me. But he was also a very private man. He preferred to be known for who he was, not for who his son happened to be. The afternoon light filtering through the conference room window cast long shadows across the table. Maggie found herself studying Garth's face, looking for traces of the man she had cared for so many years ago. The eyes were definitely Troyle's. Warm, intelligent, capable of expressing deep emotion without saying a word. "He talked about you constantly," Maggie said, the memories flowing back with startling clarity. "He was so proud of your success, but also worried that he hadn't been supportive enough when you were starting out. He told me about the early days, when you were playing small venues and struggling to make ends meet." Garth's smile was tinged with sadness. He was more supportive than he knew. Dad worked construction his whole life, and the idea of making a living playing music seemed impossible to him. But he never tried to talk me out of it, even when he must have thought I was crazy. And when things started taking off, he paused, looking out the window. "I was on the road so much. I kept telling myself I'd have time to really talk with him later, to show him how much his support meant to me." "He knew," Maggie said firmly. "Mr. Brooks, your father, he knew how much you loved him. He used to light up whenever you called, even if it was just for a few minutes between shows. He kept a picture of you performing, and he'd show it to anyone who would look. 'That's my boy,' he'd say. 'He's got a gift.'" Tears welled up in Garth's eyes, and he wiped them away without embarrassment. "I should have been here more. When he got sick, I should have canceled tours, rearranged everything. Instead, I was stuck in Atlanta during a snowstorm when he needed me most." "You were here when it mattered," Maggie replied, reaching out instinctively to touch his arm in the same comforting gesture she had used with thousands of patients and families. "And he wasn't alone before that. We made sure of that." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Garth said, his voice growing stronger. "What you did for our family, for my dad, went so far beyond normal nursing care. I've never forgotten it, and I've never stopped being grateful for it." Maggie shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had always been uncomfortable with praise, preferring to focus on the work rather than recognition. "I just did my job. Any nurse would have—" "No," Garth interrupted gently but firmly. "Any nurse would have provided medical care, administered medications, monitored vital signs. What you did was different. You saw a scared, lonely man who was facing death far from home, and you treated him like family. You sat with him during treatments when you should have been going home to your own family. You read to him when he couldn't sleep. You held his hand when the pain was bad. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of hospital life. Muffled conversations, the ding of elevator doors, the soft squeak of wheels on linoleum. Maggie was transported back to those difficult December nights in 2003, when she had been juggling her professional responsibilities with her personal crisis. "My daughter was sick too," she said quietly. "Jessica, she was going through chemotherapy at the same time as your father. Breast cancer. She was only 32, with a 5-year-old daughter of her own. Her husband had left when she got diagnosed, just packed up and disappeared one day. So there I was, trying to take care of my patients during the day, and my daughter at night." Garth leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her words. "The chemotherapy schedules often overlapped," Maggie continued. "Jessica would have her treatments on Tuesday and Friday evenings, and your father was on a similar schedule. It made sense for me to stay late on those days, to be available for both of them. But your father—" She paused, searching for the right words. "He reminded me so much of my own dad. Same gentle strength, same way of putting others at ease, even when he was the one suffering. I couldn't bear the thought of him going through those treatments alone." "You never told him about Jessica, did you?" Garth asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. Maggie shook her head. "He had enough to worry about. Besides, that's not what nursing is about. You don't burden patients with your own problems. But it helps explain why you were so compassionate," Garth said. "You understood what he was going through on a personal level. Maybe. Or maybe I just recognized a good man who deserved to be treated with dignity during his final days." Maggie's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Your father was special, Mr. Brooks. He never complained, even when the treatments made him miserable. He worried more about the other patients than himself. He asked about the nurses' families, remembered our names, always said, 'Please' and 'Thank you.' In 32 years of nursing, I've met maybe a dozen patients like him." Garth was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "After the funeral, I came back to thank everyone who had cared for him. Do you remember that night?" Maggie nodded. "You were devastated. You sat in the family lounge and cried, and I didn't know what to say to comfort you. You didn't need to say anything. You just sat with me, the same way you sat with him. You let me talk about Dad, about my regrets, about how guilty I felt for not being there enough. And then you told me something that I've carried with me every day since. I don't remember what I said. You said that love isn't measured by the amount of time we spend with someone, but by the impact we have on their life. You said that your father had talked about me constantly, that he was proud not just of my success, but of the man I had become. You said he died knowing he was loved, and that was because of the kind of son I was, not because of how many hours I logged at his bedside." Maggie felt tears forming in her own eyes now. She did remember that conversation, though she hadn't realized the impact her words had made. "You also told me something else," Garth continued. "You said that the best way to honor Dad's memory was to treat other people the way he had treated people, with kindness, respect, and genuine care. You said that grief was the price we pay for love, but that love doesn't end when someone dies. It continues through the way we live our lives. You remember all of that?" Every word. "And Mrs. O'Sullivan, Maggie, I want you to know that I've tried to live by that advice every day since. When I meet fans, when I work with other musicians, when I interact with the people who work for me, I try to ask myself, how would Dad handle this situation? And more often than not, the answer involves treating people with the same kindness and respect that you showed him." The weight of his words settled over the room like a warm blanket. Maggie had never imagined that her interactions with one grieving family could have such a lasting impact. She thought about all the patients she had cared for over the years, all the families she had comforted, all the small moments of human connection that she had assumed were forgotten as soon as they happened. "There's something else I need to tell you," Garth said, his tone shifting slightly. "The reason I'm here today isn't just to say thank you, although that's part of it. I've been looking for you for months, trying to find a way to express my gratitude in a meaningful way. I've been working with a private investigator, a really discreet guy who specializes in finding people who have made a difference in others' lives." Maggie felt a flutter of anxiety. "A private investigator?" "Don't worry," Garth said quickly, seeing her expression. "Nothing intrusive, just basic public records, employment history, that kind of thing. But what I learned about your life over the past 20 years..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maggie, I know about Jessica. I know she lost her battle with cancer in 2015. I know you've been raising your granddaughter Emma by yourself. I know about the financial struggles, the foreclosure on your house, the way you've been working extra shifts just to make ends meet." Maggie's face flushed with embarrassment and a touch of anger. "You had no right to..." "You're absolutely right," Garth interrupted. "I had no legal right to investigate your personal life, but I felt I had a moral obligation to understand what kind of person you are, what kind of life you've lived since you showed such kindness to my family. And what I discovered is that you've spent the past 20 years being the same angel to other people that you were to my dad." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. The investigator didn't just look at public records. He talked to people who know you, former colleagues, patients' families, people in your community. "Do you want to know what they said?" Maggie remained silent, unsure whether she wanted to hear the answer. "They said you're the nurse who stayed late to comfort a mother whose baby was in the NICU. They said you're the woman who organized a fundraiser for a coworker whose husband was laid off. They said you're the neighbor who shoveled snow for elderly residents without being asked, who brought groceries to families struggling with unemployment, who tutored kids in your apartment building for free." "Those are just normal things," Maggie protested. "Anyone would have..." "No, they wouldn't," Garth said firmly. "Most people would have done some of those things, maybe, or a few of them occasionally. But you've made it a way of life. Even when you were struggling financially, even when you were dealing with your own grief and loss, you continued to put other people's needs first. That's not normal, Maggie. That's extraordinary." He opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. "These are some of the people whose lives you've touched over the years. This is Marcus Williams. He was 8 years old when he was in a car accident that killed his parents. You were his nurse for 3 months. And his grandmother says you're the reason he's a pediatric nurse today. This is Elena Rodriguez. You helped her navigate the healthcare system when her husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She credits you with helping her family maintain their dignity during an impossible situation." Maggie looked at the photographs, recognizing faces that brought back floods of memories. Each one represented not just a patient, but a story of human struggle and resilience. "How did you find all these people?" "It wasn't hard," Garth said with a smile. "You left quite a trail of grateful families over the years. The hard part was narrowing down the list. I could have talked to hundreds of people whose lives you've impacted." He pulled out one more photograph, this one more recent. It showed Emma, Maggie's 17-year-old granddaughter, in her high school cap and gown at what appeared to be an academic awards ceremony. "And this is Emma," Garth said softly. "Your granddaughter, honor roll student, varsity debate team, accepted to 3 different colleges with partial scholarships. Planning to study pre-med because she wants to help people the way her grandmother does." Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. "How did you get that picture?" Emma's school posts award ceremony photos on their website. But here's what the internet doesn't show: how she's been working part-time at a grocery store to help with household expenses, how she's been applying for every scholarship she can find because she knows you're worried about college costs, how she talks about you as her hero and role model. Tears were flowing freely down Maggie's face now. She's a good girl. She deserves every opportunity in the world, but I don't know how to give them to her. My retirement pension is barely enough to cover basic expenses and college costs. That's why I'm here, Garth said gently, not just to say thank you for what you did 20 years ago, but to do something meaningful about it, to honor my father's memory by helping the woman who made his final days bearable, to show Emma that good deeds really do matter, that kindness really does come back to you, even if it sometimes takes 20 years. The room fell silent again as Maggie tried to process what he was saying. Through the window, she could see the parking lot where she had walked countless times over the years, carrying the weight of other people's sorrows and celebrating their triumphs. Soon, she would walk through that parking lot for the last time as a Nashville General employee. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Garth smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like his father. That same expression of quiet joy that Troyle had worn when talking about his son's accomplishments. "I mean, Maggie O'Sullivan, that your angel days aren't over yet. In fact, I think they're just beginning." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Garth reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. His hands were steady, but Maggie could see the emotion in his eyes as he placed the envelope on the table between them. 20 years ago, he began, his voice careful and measured, "you gave my family something precious during our darkest hour. You gave us dignity, compassion, and the knowledge that Dad wasn't alone. Today, I want to give you something in return." Maggie stared at the envelope as if it might explode. In her 64 years, she had learned to be wary of unexpected gifts. Life had taught her that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "Mr. Brooks, I appreciate the thought, but I can't accept—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "Let me explain what's in here before you decide anything. And please, call me Garth. After what you did for my dad, we're family, as far as I'm concerned." He opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. The first was a photograph of a beautiful two-story house with a wraparound porch, situated on what appeared to be several acres of land. The house was painted a soft yellow with white trim, and the front yard was filled with mature oak trees and well-maintained flower beds. "This is 1247 Maple Grove Lane, about 20 minutes from here," Garth said, watching Maggie's face carefully. "It's a 4-bedroom house on 5 acres, with a view of the Cumberland River. The previous owners were an elderly couple who maintained it beautifully before moving to assisted living." Maggie looked at the photograph, admiring the house's classic lines and peaceful setting. "It's lovely, but I don't understand why you're showing me this." Garth pulled out another document, a deed with official-looking seals and signatures. "Because, as of this morning, this house belongs to you." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. She stared at the deed, trying to make sense of the legal language, but her vision was blurring with tears. "That's impossible. I can't. You can't just—" "I can. And I did," Garth said softly. "The house is paid for in full, and the deed has been transferred to your name. The only condition is that you have to live in it. No selling it or renting it out. It's meant to be your home, yours and Emma's." Maggie's hands were shaking as she picked up the deed. Her name was there in black and white. Margaret Rose O'Sullivan. It looked official and legal and completely impossible. "This has to cost," she whispered. unable to finish the sentence. "It doesn't matter what it cost," Garth replied. "What matters is that you'll never have to worry about housing again. You'll have a place to call home, with enough space for Emma to have her own room, a quiet place to study, and room for friends to visit. There's even a small apartment above the garage that could provide rental income if you want it, or a place for Emma to stay when she comes home from college." "College?" Maggie repeated numbly. She's been accepted to 3 schools. "But the costs?" Garth smiled and pulled out another document. "That's the second part of what I wanted to discuss with you. I've established an education fund for Emma. Full tuition, room and board, books, and living expenses for 4 years at any accredited university in the United States. If she wants to go to medical school after that, the fund will cover that too." This time, Maggie couldn't speak at all. She stared at the scholarship document, Emma's name printed clearly at the top, and felt the room spinning around her. After years of worry, years of working extra shifts and cutting every possible corner, the 2 biggest concerns in her life, housing and Emma's education, were being solved in a single conversation. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "This is too much. What you're doing, it's too much." Garth leaned forward, his expression serious. "Maggie, do you know how much money I've made in my career?" She shook her head. "More than I could spend in several lifetimes. I've been blessed beyond measure, and I've tried to use that blessing responsibly. I've donated to charities, supported causes I believe in, helped families in need. But this is different. This isn't charity. This is a debt. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "I owe you for the peace of mind you gave my father during his final days. I owe you for the comfort you provided to a scared son who didn't know how to say goodbye. I owe you for the wisdom you shared that night in the family lounge, wisdom that has guided me for 20 years. And I owe you for being the kind of person who continues to give to others, even when you're struggling yourself." He pulled out his phone and showed her a text message. "This is from my daughter, who's about Emma's age. I told her what I was planning to do today, and she wrote this: 'Dad, what you're doing for that nurse is the most beautiful thing ever. It's like a real-life fairy tale, except it's better because it's real, and it's happening to someone who deserves it.'" Maggie read the message, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, but I do have one more thing to show you." Garth pulled out a final document, this one written in his own handwriting. "This is a letter from my dad. I found it in his things after the funeral, but I never knew what to do with it until now." He handed her a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age and written in the careful script of a man who had worked with his hands all his life. "To the angel nurse who cared for me, if someone is reading this, it means I didn't make it through the surgery, and that's okay. I've lived a good life, made my peace with the Lord, and raised a son I'm proud of. But I want you to know that your kindness made my final days bearable. I know you have troubles of your own, a daughter who's sick, a grandbaby to worry about. I can see it in your eyes sometimes, the weight you carry, but you never let that stop you from caring for me and the other patients. You read to me when I couldn't sleep, held my hand when the pain was bad, and treated me like I mattered. I wish I could do something to help you the way you've helped me. I don't have much money to leave behind, but I have a son who's done well for himself. If he ever finds this letter, I hope he'll remember that love shows itself through actions, not just words. I hope he'll find a way to help you, because you deserve all the good things this world has to offer. Thank you for being my angel. I'll put in a good word for you upstairs. With gratitude and affection, Troil Raymond Brooks." Maggie clutched the letter to her chest. sobbing openly now. Through her tears, she could see Troyle as clearly as if he were sitting in the room with them. His kind eyes, his gentle smile, the way he had worried more about everyone else than himself, even as he was dying. "He wrote this for you," Garth said, his own voice thick with emotion. "It took me 20 years to find you, but I think Dad would approve of the timing. You're about to retire. Emma's about to start college, and you're facing a new chapter in your life. Maybe this is exactly when you need to know that your kindness mattered, that it rippled out in ways you never imagined." Maggie wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box on the conference table, trying to compose herself enough to speak. "I need to call Emma. She's working at the grocery store until 9 tonight, but she should know." "Actually," Garth said with a mysterious smile, "I was hoping you might be willing to take a ride with me. There's someone I'd like you to meet, and something I'd like you to see." "Who?" "Emma. She's at the new house right now, along with a few other people who wanted to be part of this surprise." Maggie's eyes widened. "You contacted Emma without asking me?" "I did, and I apologize for overstepping. But I wanted her to be part of this moment. I reached out to her through her school counselor, explained who I was and what I wanted to do. Emma was skeptical at first, thought it might be some kind of scam. But when I showed her the letter from my dad and explained how you had cared for him, she started crying right there in the counselor's office." He pulled out his phone again and showed her a photo of Emma standing in front of the yellow house, her face radiant with joy and disbelief. She was holding a set of keys and grinning so widely it looked like her face might split in half. She's been there for about an hour, exploring the house and calling it Grammy's Miracle. I think she's more excited about this than you are." Maggie stared at the photo of her granddaughter, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Emma had been through so much, losing her father to abandonment, her mother to cancer, watching her grandmother struggle financially while trying to maintain their dignity. The idea that something wonderful was finally happening for them felt almost too good to be true. "What if this is a mistake?" she whispered. "What if I don't deserve this? What if there are strings attached that I don't understand?" Garth reached across the table and gently took her hands in his. "Maggie, I understand your caution. In your position, I'd be asking the same questions. But I want you to listen to me very carefully. There are no strings attached. The house is yours, free and clear. The education fund for Emma is established in her name, managed by a reputable trust company. You don't owe me anything. Not friendship, not publicity, not even a thank you card at Christmas. This is a gift, pure and simple, from one family to another. But why so much? A card, flowers, even a small donation to the hospital in your father's name would have been more than enough. Because small gestures don't honor the magnitude of what you did," Garth replied. "You didn't just provide medical care to my dad, you gave him dignity, comfort, and peace during his final days. You helped a grieving son say goodbye with grace instead of regret. And you've spent the 20 years since then continuing to be that same kind of person to hundreds of other families. This isn't about repaying a debt. It's about recognizing someone whose life has been a testament to human goodness." He stood up and extended his hand to her. "Will you come with me? Emma's waiting, and I think there are some other people you'd like to see." Maggie looked at the deed, the scholarship papers, and her father's letter spread across the table. Part of her wanted to bundle them all up and hand them back, to return to her small apartment and her modest life, where she understood the rules and knew what was expected of her. But a larger part, the part that had spent 32 years caring for others, was curious about what came next. Other people? Some of your former colleagues wanted to be there when you saw the house. Sarah Chen drove over after her shift ended. Dr. Morrison is there too. He wanted to apologize for making you worry about retirement paperwork, when he was actually just trying to coordinate today's surprise. And there are a few other people, patients' families you've helped over the years, who heard what was happening and asked if they could be part of it. Dr. Morrison was in on this? He had to be. We needed someone at the hospital who could verify your employment history and help coordinate the timing. He's the one who suggested we wait until your retirement week. Said it would be the perfect way to start your next chapter. Maggie stood up slowly, her legs still unsteady from the emotional shock of the past hour. I don't know how to process all of this. It feels like I'm dreaming. Then let's go make sure it's real, Garth said, offering her his arm. My truck is in the parking lot, and Emma's going to explode with excitement if we keep her waiting much longer. As they walked down the familiar hospital corridors, Maggie found herself looking at everything with new eyes. These hallways where she had spent 3 decades of her life, these rooms where she had witnessed countless moments of human triumph and tragedy, this building that had been more like home to her than any place she had actually lived. All of it was about to become part of her past rather than her present. Are you okay? Garth asked as they waited for the elevator. I keep thinking about all the patients I've cared for over the years, she said. All the families I've comforted. All the small moments that I thought were forgotten as soon as they happened. Your father's letter makes me wonder how many other people remember those moments differently than I do. That's what good people never understand, Garth replied as the elevator doors opened. You think you're just doing your job, just being decent, just treating people the way anyone would. But most people don't have that level of compassion. Most people don't go the extra mile, don't see past the disease to the person, don't sacrifice their own comfort to ease someone else's suffering. What feels normal to you feels miraculous to the people receiving your care. They rode the elevator in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Maggie was surprised to see several staff members gathered near the nurses' station, all wearing smiles and looking in their direction. Word travels fast in a hospital, Garth said with a chuckle. I think everyone knows what's happening today. Maria Rodriguez, one of the night shift nurses, approached them with tears in her eyes. Maggie, we heard about your surprise. We couldn't be happier for you. You deserve every bit of this and more. Thank you, Maggie said, hugging Maria tightly. I still can't quite believe it's real. Believe it, said Dr. Morrison, approaching from the direction of the administrative offices. And don't worry about any of the paperwork details. We'll handle everything on this end. You just focus on enjoying your new life. As they walked toward the parking lot, more staff members appeared. Orderlies, technicians, doctors, cleaning staff. It seemed like half the hospital had found reasons to be near the exit at exactly this time. They offered congratulations, hugs, and words of gratitude for Maggie's years of service. By the time they reached Garth's truck, Maggie was crying again, but this time from overwhelming gratitude rather than shock. You've touched a lot of lives, Garth observed as he helped her into the passenger seat. I don't think you realize how loved you are. I'm just going to miss this place, she said, looking back at the building where she had spent so much of her adult life. It's been my second home for so long. But now you're going to have a real home, Garth said as he started the engine. A place where you can make new memories with Emma, where you can have friends over for dinner, where you can plant a garden if you want one. The best part of your life doesn't have to be behind you, Maggie. It might just be beginning. As they drove through the familiar streets of Nashville, Maggie watched the city pass by through the passenger window. She had driven these roads thousands of times over the years, usually exhausted after long shifts, worried about money, thinking about everything she needed to do at home. Today, for the first time in decades, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope for the future. Tell me about Emma, Garth said, as they turned onto a tree-lined road she didn't recognize. What are her college plans? She wants to study pre-med at Vanderbilt, Maggie said, her voice filling with pride. She's been accepted there with a partial scholarship, but even with that, the costs were going to be impossible. She was planning to start at community college and work her way up, but now, she trailed off, still struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. Now she can go wherever she wants, study whatever she's passionate about, and focus on her education instead of worrying about money, Garth finished. That's exactly what Dad would have wanted. He believed education was the key to everything. The way out of poverty, the path to opportunities, the foundation for a meaningful life. They turned into a driveway marked by stone pillars and a sign that read Maple Grove Lane. The driveway curved through mature trees for about 100 yards before opening into a clearing where the yellow house sat like something from a magazine cover. Several cars were parked in the circular drive, and Maggie could see people gathered on the front porch. "Oh my," she breathed, seeing the house in person for the first time. It was even more beautiful than the photographs had suggested, with its wraparound porch, large windows, and setting among the oak trees. But what took her breath away was the sight of Emma sitting on the porch steps, practically vibrating with excitement. Before Garth had even put the truck in park, Emma was running toward them, her face streaked with happy tears. The moment Maggie stepped out of the truck, her granddaughter enveloped her in a hug so tight it threatened to crack ribs. "Grammy! Can you believe this? Can you believe this is real? I have my own room, with a window seat, and there's a library. An actual library with built-in bookshelves. And the kitchen has granite countertops and—" Emma was talking so fast the words tumbled over each other. "Slow down, sweetheart," Maggie laughed, holding Emma at arm's length to get a good look at her. "Are you okay? This isn't too overwhelming?" "Overwhelming? Grammy, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to us. Do you know what this means? You don't have to worry about money anymore. I can go to Vanderbilt. We can have Christmas dinner in our own house instead of the apartment complex community room. I can have friends over without worrying about disturbing the neighbors through thin walls." Maggie looked over Emma's shoulder at the group of people gathered on the porch. She recognized Sarah Chen and Dr. Morrison, but there were several other faces that looked familiar, but out of context. "Who are all these people?" "Come and see," Emma said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the house. Mr. Brooks invited some special guests. As they approached the porch, one of the women stepped forward, an elegant African-American woman in her 50s wearing a flowing dress and a warm smile. "Mrs. O'Sullivan," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Patricia Williams. You probably don't remember me, but you cared for my son Marcus 20 years ago after his car accident." Maggie's eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Williams, of course I remember. Marcus with the broken leg and the infectious smile. How is he?" "He's a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital now," Patricia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He says you're the reason he chose healthcare as a career. He wanted to be here today, but he's working a double shift. He said to tell you that every child he cares for benefits from the example you set all those years ago." Another woman stepped forward, smaller and older, with silver hair and hands weathered by years of hard work. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. You helped my family when my husband had Alzheimer's. You spent hours teaching me how to navigate the healthcare system, how to advocate for him, how to maintain his dignity, even when the disease was taking everything else." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Maggie said softly, remembering the frightened woman who had struggled with English and felt lost in the maze of medical bureaucracy. "How is your husband?" "He passed 3 years ago, but peacefully, at home, surrounded by family. We were able to give him the death he wanted because you taught us how to fight for what he needed. My children and grandchildren all know your name. You're part of our family stories now." One by one, the people on the porch introduced themselves, each one a thread in the tapestry of Maggie's career that she had never realized she was weaving. There was the daughter of an elderly patient who had died alone until Maggie had arranged for volunteers to sit with him. There was the brother of a young mother who had been in a car accident, grateful for the way Maggie had helped his family make impossible decisions with grace and dignity. "I had no idea," Maggie whispered to Garth as the introductions continued. "I never knew that any of these people remembered." "That's because you never did it for recognition," he replied. "You did it because it was right, because it was who you are. But recognition doesn't depend on intention, Maggie. Good deeds create ripples whether we see them or not." Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Grammy, you have to see the inside. The living room has a fireplace, and the master bedroom has a bathroom bigger than our whole apartment." As the group moved toward the front door, Maggie paused for a moment on the porch, looking out over the 5 acres that were now, impossibly, hers. The sun was setting through the oak trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. In the distance, she could hear the gentle sound of the Cumberland River flowing past. "Are you ready?" Garth asked, holding the front door open for her. "I don't think anyone's ever really ready for a miracle," she replied. "But I'm grateful for it anyway." The front door opened into a spacious foyer with hardwood floors and a staircase that curved gracefully to the second floor. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. The house smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers, and Maggie could hear the distant sound of classical music playing softly from somewhere deeper in the house. "The previous owners took excellent care of everything," Garth explained, as the group followed Emma through the foyer. "But I had a team come in to do some updates. Fresh paint, new appliances, and I took the liberty of having it furnished. I hope you don't mind. I thought you might want to start fresh rather than moving furniture from your apartment." Maggie ran her hand along the smooth banister, still struggling to process that this beautiful space was now her home. "You furnished it? The whole house?" "With help," Emma called from the living room. "Mr. Brooks asked me what kind of style you like, what colors make you happy. I told him you love soft blues and warm yellows, and that you've always wanted a reading nook by a window." They entered the living room, and Maggie gasped. The space was decorated exactly as she would have done it herself if money had been no object. Comfortable furniture in soft blue fabrics, warm yellow walls, and, yes, a perfect reading nook by the large front window, complete with built-in bookshelves and a window seat with blue and yellow cushions. "How did you know?" she asked Emma, settling into the window seat and running her hands over the soft cushions. "Grammy, I've lived with you for 8 years. I know you always sit by the window when you're reading. I know you save those home decorating magazines even though you never buy anything from them. I know you look at pretty houses when we drive through nice neighborhoods and point out the details you love." Dr. Morrison stepped forward with a wrapped package in his hands. "This is from the nursing staff at the hospital. We wanted you to have something for your new home." Maggie unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a beautiful ceramic vase filled with fresh flowers and a card signed by dozens of her former colleagues. The card read, "For Maggie O'Sullivan, whose compassion made our workplace feel like family. May your new home be filled with the same warmth and love you brought to our lives every day." "You didn't have to do this," she said, hugging Dr. Morrison tightly. "Yes, we did," he replied. 32 years of exceptional service deserves recognition. Besides, we wanted you to know that even though you're retiring, you'll always be part of the Nashville General family." Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. "Grammy, you have to see the kitchen, and the library, and your bedroom, and my room." She grabbed Maggie's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. The kitchen was a dream come true. spacious and bright, with granite countertops, modern appliances, and a large island perfect for cooking and casual meals. French doors led from the breakfast nook to a screened-in back porch that overlooked the garden and the river beyond. "I thought you might enjoy cooking again," Garth said, watching her expression. "Emma told me you used to love making big family dinners when Jessica was younger, but your apartment kitchen was too small for entertaining." "I did love that," Maggie said softly, running her hands over the smooth granite. "Sunday dinners were my favorite. Jessica would bring friends home from college, and we'd spend the whole afternoon in the kitchen, cooking and talking and laughing. After she got sick, and then after she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "After she died, you stopped cooking for pleasure," Emma said gently. "But maybe now we can start having Sunday dinners again. Maybe some of your hospital friends would like to come over sometimes." The tour continued through the rest of the first floor. A formal dining room with a chandelier and seating for 8, a family room with a stone fireplace and comfortable chairs arranged for conversation, and a small office that looked out over the garden. But it was the library that took Maggie's breath away. The room was lined floor to ceiling with built-in bookshelves, most of them already filled with books. There was a reading chair by the window, perfect for afternoon light, and a small table just the right height for a cup of tea and reading glasses. "I hope you don't mind that I took some liberties with the book selection," Garth said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I contacted a local bookstore and asked them to stock the shelves with classics, bestsellers, books on nursing and healthcare, and some special selections. But there's plenty of room for your own books, too." Maggie walked slowly around the room, reading the titles on the spines. There were novels by authors she had always meant to read, but never had time for. Books on gardening and cooking, medical texts, and memoirs by nurses and healthcare workers. On the small table by the reading chair, she found a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "What's this for?" she asked, picking up the journal. "For whatever you want," Garth replied. "Your thoughts, your memories, your plans for the future." "Emma mentioned that you used to write in a diary when she was younger, but you stopped when life got too busy. I thought maybe you'd like to start again." Emma was tugging on her sleeve again. "Come see upstairs. Your room is amazing." The master bedroom was spacious and serene, decorated in the same soft blues and yellows as the rest of the house. The bed was positioned to take advantage of the view of the river, and there was a sitting area with 2 comfortable chairs and a small table, perfect for morning coffee or evening reading. But it was the master bathroom that made Maggie laugh out loud. It featured a deep, soaking tub positioned under a large window, separate shower, double sinks, and enough space to actually move around comfortably. "This bathroom is bigger than our kitchen at the apartment," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "I know!" Emma squealed. "You can actually take baths, real baths, not those 3-minute showers because the hot water heater is broken." Emma's room was down the hall, a teenager's dream with a 4-poster bed, a desk by the window for studying, and enough space for all her books, clothes, and the art supplies she loved but rarely had room to use in their cramped apartment. "There are 2 more bedrooms," Garth explained as they toured the upstairs. "I thought one could be a guest room for when Emma comes home from college, and the other could be whatever you want. A craft room, an exercise room, office space, whatever makes you happy." Standing in the hallway of her new home, surrounded by people who cared about her, Maggie felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the change that was happening in her life. For 20 years, ever since Jessica had been diagnosed with cancer, she had been in survival mode, working, worrying, making difficult choices, putting everyone else's needs first. The idea that she could now think about what would make her happy was almost foreign. "I need to sit down for a minute," she said, feeling suddenly dizzy. Emma immediately guided her to the window seat in her new bedroom, while Sarah Chen checked her pulse with professional concern. "It's just a lot to process," Maggie said, smiling weakly. "Good overwhelming, but still overwhelming." "That's completely normal," Dr. Morrison said. "You've just had your entire life changed in the span of a few hours. Anyone would need time to adjust." Garth sat down in one of the chairs across from her, his expression concerned. "Maggie, I want to make sure you understand that there's no pressure here. You don't have to make any decisions today about anything. The house is yours, whether you move in tomorrow or next month. The education fund for Emma is established regardless of what you decide to do. Take all the time you need to process this." "I'm not having second thoughts," she said quickly. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, that houses like this don't happen to people like me." Patricia Williams, who had been quiet during the tour, stepped forward. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, may I tell you something? When my Marcus was 8 years old and in that hospital bed, scared and in pain and asking for his daddy who had died in the same accident that hurt him, you didn't just give him medicine and check his chart. You sat with him when he had nightmares. You brought him books from the children's library. You helped him write letters to his daddy that we burned in the hospital courtyard so the smoke could carry them to heaven." Maggie remembered Marcus, a brave little boy with big eyes and a broken heart, along with his broken bones. "You gave my son hope when I didn't know how to," Patricia continued. "You showed him that adults could be trusted to care for him, that he wasn't alone in the world. That little boy grew up to be a man who dedicates his life to caring for other people's children. Do you think that's a coincidence? Every person in this house today has a similar story." Elena Rodriguez added, "We're not here because you're famous or wealthy or important in the world's eyes. We're here because you've been important in our lives, because your kindness changed our family's stories. Houses like this absolutely do happen to people like you, people who spend their lives making the world better, one person at a time." Emma sat down next to her grandmother and took her hand. "Grammy, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little and afraid of trying new things? That courage isn't the absence of fear," Maggie said softly. "It's doing the right thing, even when you're scared." "Well, I think accepting this gift is the right thing to do," Emma said. "Not just for us, but for Mr. Brooks, too. He's been looking for a way to honor his father's memory for 20 years. You're giving him that gift by letting him do this for us." Garth nodded. "Emma's right. This isn't just about giving. It's about receiving gracefully, too. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is allow someone else to be generous to us." Maggie looked around the room at the faces of the people who had gathered to celebrate this moment with her. She thought about Troil Brooks, alone in his hospital bed 20 years ago, and how a simple decision to stay late and read poetry to a frightened patient had created ripples that reached all the way to this day. "Okay," she said finally, her voice growing stronger. "Okay, I accept. I accept the house and the education fund for Emma, and whatever else you want to give us. But I need you to understand something, Garth. This isn't the end of the story for me. I may be retiring from the hospital, but I'm not retiring from caring about people. This gift, this new beginning, I'm going to use it to keep making a difference, just in new ways." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Garth said with a smile. "In fact, I'm counting on it. The world needs more people like you, Maggie O'Sullivan. Now you'll have the resources and the freedom to be exactly who you've always been, just on a bigger scale." Emma threw her arms around her grandmother. "So we're really going to live here? This is really our home? This is really our home," Maggie confirmed, hugging Emma tightly. "Our home." As the sun set completely and the group began to disperse, promising to return soon for a proper housewarming party. Maggie found herself alone with Garth and Emma on the screened-in back porch. The river was a dark ribbon in the distance, and the sound of crickets filled the evening air. "I have one more thing for you," Garth said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "This one's personal, not part of the official gifts." Maggie unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small silver locket. When she opened it, she found two tiny photographs, one of Garth Brooks in his younger days, and one of Jessica holding baby Emma. "The picture of Dad is from his wallet," Garth explained. "He carried it for 40 years. The picture of Jessica and Emma, I hope you don't mind. I found it in some of the newspaper coverage of the hospital's employee recognition events over the years. I thought you might like to carry them both with you." Maggie's eyes filled with tears as she studied the photographs. Two people who had shaped her life in profound ways, now together in a small silver heart that she could wear close to her own heart. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." As Garth prepared to leave, he turned back to her one more time. "Maggie, I want you to know that this isn't goodbye. I hope we'll stay in touch, that you'll let me know how you're settling in, how Emma's doing in college. You're family now, as far as I'm concerned." "Family," she repeated, trying out the word. After so many years of just her and Emma against the world, the idea of having an extended family again felt both wonderful and slightly terrifying. "Family," Emma confirmed, hugging Garth tightly. "Thank you for giving us our miracle." After he left, Maggie and Emma sat on the porch in comfortable silence, both of them processing the day's events. The house around them was quiet but welcoming, full of possibilities and new beginnings. "Grammy?" Emma said finally. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mom knows about what happened today?" Maggie looked up at the stars, thinking about her daughter who had fought so hard and lost so young, who had worried constantly about Emma's future, and Maggie's financial security. "I think she knows," she said softly. "I think she's been watching over us, making sure we'd be okay. Maybe she even had something to do with Mr. Brooks finding us when he did." "I like that idea," Emma said, leaning against her grandmother's shoulder. "I like thinking that all the good people we've loved are still looking out for us somehow." "They are," Maggie said with certainty. "Love doesn't end when someone dies, Emma. It just changes form. Your mother's love, your grandfather's love, Mr. Brooks's father's love. It's all still here, still working in the world, still making good things happen." As they finally went inside to spend their first night in their new home, Maggie carried with her the silver locket, Troyle's letter, and the memory of a day when kindness came full circle after 20 years. Tomorrow, she would start figuring out what came next, how to be a retiree, how to live in a house instead of an apartment, how to use her new freedom to continue making a difference in the world. But tonight, she was simply grateful. Grateful for the patient who had reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. Grateful for the son who had never forgotten an act of kindness. Grateful for the granddaughter who gave her life meaning. And grateful for the reminder that sometimes, if you wait long enough and live with enough love, miracles really do happen. 3 months later, the house on Maple Grove Lane had transformed from a beautiful but impersonal space into a warm, lived-in home. Maggie's personal touches were everywhere. Family photographs on the mantelpiece, her mother's china in the dining room cabinet, Emma's artwork from childhood framed and hung throughout the house. The garden beds that had been dormant when they arrived were now blooming with late-season flowers that Maggie had planted herself, rediscovering a love of gardening that she hadn't had time to pursue in years. On this particular Sunday morning in early October, the kitchen was filled with the aromas of a traditional family dinner in preparation. Maggie stood at the granite island, preparing her famous pot roast, while Emma sat at the breakfast table, surrounded by college brochures and scholarship applications, though she no longer needed to worry about the financial aspects. "Sarah and her husband will be here at 2, Maggie said, checking her watch. "Dr. Morrison and his wife are coming at 2:30, and the Williams family said they'd arrive around 3. I think this is going to be our biggest Sunday dinner yet." Emma looked up from her paperwork with a grin. "Remember when we used to eat Sunday dinner on TV trays in the apartment because there wasn't room for a real dining table? Now we're hosting dinner parties for 12 people. I still can't quite believe it sometimes," Maggie admitted, seasoning the roast before placing it in the oven. "Some mornings I wake up and think I'm going to be late for my shift at the hospital, and then I remember that you're a lady of leisure now?" Emma teased. "Hardly leisure," Maggie laughed. Between the volunteer work at the free clinic, the reading program at the elementary school, and trying to learn how to use all the features on this fancy oven, I'm busier than ever." The volunteer work had started almost immediately after Maggie's retirement. Unable to completely step away from healthcare, she had begun spending 3 days a week at a free clinic that served the uninsured and underinsured population of Nashville. The clinic was understaffed and overwhelmed, and Maggie's experience and compassionate approach had made an immediate difference. "Speaking of the clinic," Emma said, "didn't you say they were considering expanding their services?" "Dr. Patterson thinks we could add a mental health component if we can find the funding," Maggie replied, pulling vegetables from the refrigerator. "A lot of our patients are dealing with depression and anxiety related to their financial struggles and health problems, but we don't have anyone on staff who's trained to provide counseling." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Grammy, you know you could probably fund that expansion yourself now, right? I mean, Mr. Brooks didn't just give us enough to be comfortable. He gave us enough to help other people, too." The thought had occurred to Maggie many times over the past few months. The house came with a modest endowment for maintenance and property taxes, but even more significant was the investment account that Garth had established in her name. The monthly income from that account was more than her nursing salary had ever been, leaving her with far more money than she needed for her simple lifestyle. "I've been thinking about that," she said, beginning to chop carrots with the practiced efficiency of someone who had prepared thousands of meals. "But I want to be thoughtful about it. Money can solve some problems, but it can also create new ones if not handled carefully." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Emma jumped up to answer it, returning a moment later with Garth Brooks in tow. He had become a regular visitor over the past few months, stopping by every few weeks to check on them and often staying for dinner. The formality of their early interactions had given way to genuine friendship. "I hope you don't mind an unexpected guest," he said, hugging Maggie warmly. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how you were settling in." "You know you're always welcome," Maggie replied, automatically setting another place at the table in her mind. "Perfect timing, actually. I was just telling Emma about the clinic's expansion plans." "The mental health program?" Garth asked, settling into one of the kitchen chairs. "That sounds like exactly the kind of project that would make a real difference in people's lives." "You two have been talking about this?" Emma asked, looking back and forth between them. "Garth stopped by the clinic last week," Maggie explained. "He wanted to see where I was volunteering, meet the staff, understand what we were trying to accomplish." "It's an impressive operation," Garth said. "Dr. Patterson and her team are doing incredible work with limited resources. The mental health expansion could probably be funded for about $50,000 a year, enough to hire a part-time counselor and provide basic psychiatric medications for patients who can't afford them." "That's not very much money," Emma said thoughtfully. "I mean, in the context of what we've been given, that's really not very much money at all." Maggie set down her knife and looked at her granddaughter. At 17, Emma was showing wisdom beyond her years, shaped by the challenges they had faced together, but not hardened by them. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" "I'm thinking that Mom would want us to use this blessing to help other people," Emma said, her voice growing more confident. She always said that when you're given more than you need, it's because you're supposed to share it with people who don't have enough. Maybe the mental health program could be our first project. Maggie felt a familiar tightness in her chest whenever Emma spoke about her mother with such clarity and wisdom. Jessica had indeed raised her daughter with strong values about generosity and social responsibility, even while they were struggling themselves. "The Margaret O'Sullivan Mental Health Initiative," Garth suggested with a smile, "has a nice ring to it." "Oh no," Maggie said quickly, waving her hands. "If we're going to do this, we're not naming it after me. That's not what this is about." "What about the Troy Brooks Community Wellness Program?" Emma suggested. "That honors Mr. Brooks's father and focuses on the broader goal of helping people be healthy in every way." Garth's eyes brightened. Dad would love that. He always believed that mental health was just as important as physical health, though in his generation, people didn't talk about it much. He struggled with depression after my mother died, but he was too proud to ask for help. "Then it's settled," Maggie said, surprising herself with how quickly she had made the decision. "We'll fund the program. I'll call Dr. Patterson tomorrow and set up a meeting to discuss the details." The afternoon passed quickly as more guests arrived for Sunday dinner. The dining room that had seemed so large and formal when they first moved in was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the comfortable chaos of a true family gathering. Sarah Chen and her husband shared news about their recent adoption proceedings. Dr. Morrison and his wife talked about their plans for retirement travel. The Williams family updated everyone on Marcus's promotion to head nurse in the pediatric ICU. As Maggie looked around the table at the faces of people who had become her chosen family, she thought about how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been counting pennies and worrying about Emma's future. Now she was planning philanthropic projects and hosting dinner parties for 12 people. "Penny for your thoughts," Garth said, sitting down next to her on the front porch after dinner while the other guests helped Emma with the dishes. "I was just thinking about the ripple effect," she said, adjusting the silver locket at her throat. "Your father's kindness to me, my care for him, your generosity to us, and now our ability to help others. It's like throwing a stone in a pond. The circles just keep expanding." "That's exactly how Dad would have wanted it," Garth replied. "He used to say that the measure of a life wasn't how much you accumulated, but how much you gave away and how much love you left behind." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun set over the river. The October air was crisp but not cold, and the trees were beginning to show their autumn colors. "I have something to tell you," Garth said finally. "I've been working on a project, and I wanted to run it by you before I make any official announcements." "What kind of project?" "I'm starting a foundation," he said. "The Troy Brooks Foundation for Healthcare Angels. The mission is to identify and support healthcare workers who go above and beyond in their care for patients. People like you who see their job as a calling rather than just a profession." Maggie turned to look at him, intrigued by the concept. The foundation would provide grants for education, sabbaticals for rest and renewal, and sometimes larger gifts, like the one I was able to give you, he continued. "I want to find other nurses, doctors, therapists, and caregivers who are making a difference in people's lives, often at the expense of their own financial security or personal well-being." "That sounds wonderful," Maggie said, "but also overwhelming. How would you even begin to identify people like that?" "The same way I found you," Garth replied, "by listening to the stories that families tell about exceptional care they've received, by working with hospital administrators to identify staff members who consistently go above and beyond. By creating a nomination process where patients and families can recommend caregivers who have made a difference in their lives. And you want my input on this? I want more than your input. I want you to help me run it. Maggie, you understand healthcare from the inside. You know what nurses and other caregivers need, what challenges they face, what kind of support would make the biggest difference in their lives. I can provide the funding, but I need someone with your experience and wisdom to help guide the Foundation's work. The offer took Maggie's breath away. She had been struggling with what to do with her newfound freedom and resources, feeling simultaneously grateful for her good fortune and restless about how to use it meaningfully. The idea of helping to support other healthcare workers felt like a perfect way to honor both her own career and Troyle's memory. Would this be a volunteer position? She asked. It would be whatever you want it to be. Part-time, full-time, volunteer, paid. We'll structure it however works best for your life. The important thing is having your expertise and passion involved in the decision-making process. Emma appeared in the doorway, having finished supervising the kitchen cleanup. Are you two planning to save the world out here? Something like that, Garth said with a grin. I just offered your grandmother a job. What kind of job? Emma asked, settling into one of the porch chairs. As Garth explained the Foundation concept, Emma's eyes grew wider with excitement. Grammy, this is perfect for you. You could help so many people, not just patients, but the caregivers who take care of them. It's like being a nurse for nurses. I haven't said yes yet, Maggie protested, though she could feel her own excitement building. It's a big responsibility. What if I'm not qualified to make decisions about giving away large amounts of money? You've been making decisions about people's lives and well-being for 32 years, Emma pointed out. Money is just a tool. The important part is understanding what people need and how to provide it effectively. Besides, Garth added, you wouldn't be making decisions alone. We'd build a board of advisors with expertise in healthcare, philanthropy, and nonprofit management. Your role would be to provide the insider's perspective, to make sure we're addressing real needs in practical ways. That night, after all the guests had gone home and Emma had retreated to her room to work on college applications, Maggie sat in her library with a cup of tea and the leather-bound journal Garth had given her. She had been writing in it regularly over the past few months, recording her thoughts about the transition from working life to retirement, her observations about her new volunteer work, and her reflections on the unexpected turn her life had taken. Tonight, she wrote, October 15th, I think Jessica would be proud of what we're building here. Not just the house and the financial security, but the sense of purpose and community. Emma is thriving. Her college applications are complete, her confidence is growing, and she's starting to talk about her future with excitement rather than anxiety. The dinner parties have become my favorite tradition. There's something magical about filling this big dining room with people who care about each other, sharing stories and laughter and good food. It reminds me of the dinners we used to have when Jessica was young, but it's also something new. A chosen family built around shared values rather than blood relations. Garth's Foundation idea feels like the next right step. I've been looking for a way to use this blessing meaningfully, and helping other healthcare workers seems like the perfect way to honor both my own career and Troyle's memory. The idea of supporting other angels, people who see caregiving as a calling rather than just a job, resonates deeply with me. I keep thinking about that night 20 years ago when I sat with Troyle during his final days. I had no idea that those quiet hours of reading poetry and holding his hand would lead to all of this. It makes me wonder about all the other small acts of kindness that happen every day. In hospitals, in schools, in neighborhoods. between strangers who take a moment to see each other's humanity. How many of those moments are creating ripples that we'll never know about? Tomorrow, I'll call Dr. Patterson about funding the mental health program at the clinic. Next week, I'll tell Garth that yes, I want to help with his foundation. And every day, I'll try to remember that this new life I've been given isn't just about receiving blessings, it's about passing them along. As she closed the journal and prepared for bed, Maggie walked through the house that still sometimes felt too good to be true. In the kitchen, she paused to look at the photographs on the refrigerator. Pictures of their Sunday dinner gatherings, snapshots of Emma at various school events, and a professional photo of the clinic staff that Dr. Patterson had given her after her first month of volunteering. One photo in particular caught her attention. It was from last week's dinner, showing the entire group gathered around the dining room table. Garth was at one end, Emma at the other, and Maggie was in the middle, surrounded by the friends who had become family. Everyone was laughing at something Sarah's husband had said, and the joy on their faces was unmistakable. But what struck Maggie most about the photo was something she hadn't noticed when it was taken. In the background, barely visible but definitely there, was the small framed picture of Troy Brooks that she kept on the sideboard. He was watching over their gathering, his gentle smile a reminder that love and kindness create connections that transcend time and death. 6 months ago, Maggie O'Sullivan had been a tired nurse facing retirement with more worries than hopes. Tonight, she was a woman with a beautiful home, a secure future, and a sense of purpose that felt larger and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined possible. But perhaps most importantly, she was proof that small acts of compassion, holding a frightened patient's hand, staying late to read poetry to someone who was dying alone, treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances, could create ripples of blessing that lasted decades and touched countless lives. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the master bedroom that still felt like a luxury, Maggie whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to Troy Brooks, to Jessica, and to all the mysterious forces that had conspired to turn 20 minutes of bedside kindness into a lifetime of abundance and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to make a difference, new ways to pass along the blessings she had received. The Troy Brooks Foundation for Healthcare Angels would become reality. The clinic's mental health program would help people who desperately needed support. And somewhere in Nashville, another nurse would stay late with a frightened patient, never knowing that this simple act of compassion might someday change both their lives in ways they could never imagine. The circle of kindness would continue, expanding outward like ripples on a pond, carrying love and hope to shores that couldn't yet be seen. And Margaret O'Sullivan, the angel in scrubs who had never expected anything in return for her care, would spend the rest of her life discovering that sometimes the most profound gifts come disguised as ordinary moments of human connection. In her dreams that night, she was back in room 712 at Nashville General Hospital. But this time, she wasn't alone with her patient. The room was filled with all the people whose lives had been touched by kindness, patients she had comforted, families she had supported, colleagues she had mentored, and the countless others who had received the ripple effects of love passed along from person to person, generation to generation. And in the center of it all, Troy Raymond Brooks Sr. was smiling, his gentle eyes twinkling with the knowledge that his final gift to the world, a son who remembered the importance of gratitude, and a letter that found its way to exactly the right person at exactly the right time, had created more beauty and hope than any of them could have ever imagined. The angel in scrubs had found her wings at last, and the flight was just beginning.